Thank you. It's been such an amazing day. It's such a wonderful venue. It's amazing to be part of it. I've got this all to go through tomorrow again, so happy days. This is my presentation. I'm going to talk about out-of-hours on-call. First of all, a small bit of audience engagement. So who here has ever done like 24/7 out-of-hours on-call? That's a lot of people. Is anyone on-call right now? Okay. We can help if something goes wrong. That could be better than this talk. First of all, I'm going to talk about why on-call is great. I do actually love on-call. It's like the perfect storm of ownership, of technical challenges. Like you can discover and learn so much about your systems. It's a great way to grow your organization or grow your infrastructure and improve the resilience of your people and your systems. It connects you to your customers and technical stack. If your customers are trying to use your systems or your software and they can't do so and you're doing something about it, that's great. You're fixing stuff on their behalf. And it's really satisfying to get that adrenaline rush when you fix the thing and people can get back doing whatever their jobs are that depends on it. Also, there's loads of opportunities that come out of on-call work. I know that in companies that are growing or scaling, the work that you kind of come across in on-call can be indicative of, say, systems that need to be expanded or that aren't processes that aren't scaling. So there's loads of really positive opportunities that come out of on-call work. Also, personally speaking, it's been a part of my career growth. So prior to my current role, I worked in this small bookstore called Amazon, and I ended up being what's known as a call leader in Amazon, which is where I had a responsibility for managing the outages that, say, took down the retail website or similar. And so this role opened up a lot of doors to me, got me working with a lot of different teams, and so just personally, I just grew a lot out of doing this type of work. The brief summary of all this is on-call is a great opportunity, and we should all do it. At the exact same time, on-call is absolutely terrible. Actually, the Steve Williams talk earlier on just got me thinking about the noise of pagers. I think he had a pager go off for the RNLI, and I was talking backstage with him. He mentioned that he was watching a TV program that had that pager noise go off, and he automatically got up and started walking away, and heart started racing. And this exact same thing has happened to me with the ringtone of the first few years of on-call. Whenever I hear that ringtone again, it's seriously stressful, and even my wife can remember the sound of it. There's some amount of trauma involved in responding to things that break in the middle of the night, getting you out of bed, and being on the hook for it. Even though it's not as life and death critical as the RNLI work, there's still a lot of stress involved. So just this function can degrade your life. It can be considerably worse as well if you're getting paged all the time, or if if the company or the place you're working for doesn't have the time or resources to invest in making on-call a good experience. And so it can be especially no fun when you're being paged and ultimately you have no control over what you're being paged over, or you have no time to kind of go back and fix root cause at a later stage. So this stuff makes work not just happen in the middle of the night, but it can be done in a way that's unsatisfying to you and means you can't get to root cause things. And it can become overwhelming over time. You can just get into a rut of feeling like everything is broken all of the time, that there's no way we can never fix any of this. And it can draw attention to, say, a team who maybe they aren't paying so much attention to their services, or you're going through rapid growth and can't scale ahead of it. Or maybe just there's implementation decisions or technical debt that's hard to change, that's resulting in things breaking all the time. So on-call, there's opportunities for it being a really terrible personal experience to balance why on-call is awesome. So a little bit of background. So I'm going to tell a story about how we improved out-of-hours on-call at a place where I work called Intercom. So I joined about 5 years ago. We've been growing fast during that time. We've got a stand outside if you want to come and chat with us. We're a customer messaging startup based primarily out of Dublin and San Francisco, but also now London. So we have this nice, cute messenger that customers use to chat to you, like there's GIFs and emojis and a back-end app that doesn't look as good on a large screen. So over time, I'm going to give a little bit of history lesson. When Intercom kind of had a relatively small engineering team, it was pretty much just our CTO, Kieran, co-founder, who was on call. Like, we've only got a handful of people building things. One person kind of knows what the Heroku setup is or what the AWS setup is and how to fix things when things go wrong. So this is probably OK at this kind of level of scale. When we started hiring more engineers, we built out an infrastructure team. So this is where I got involved, and we started having systems engineers and people who were kind of used to running this kind of infrastructure and automating things and setting things up to grow and scale. But another thing kind of happened then. We had a high degree of ownership of our services. We kind of practiced, like, you build it, you operate it. And this is pretty good for making sure that teams had a lot of ownership of what they built, and they knew how to build it and run it. But it also ended up being that a lot of people ended up on call. So we kind of accidentally ended up in this way that teams were building stuff, they go on call for it. And this was kind of problematic. Well, there was more than one problem. First of all, too many people on call. I mentioned my time at Amazon. I'd seen like less people on call for S3 than I did for the entirety of Intercom, and S3 is a pretty big service. So this feels like mismatched. That we had way too many people who were carrying around their phones, ready for PagerDuty to go off at the weekends. Secondly, we kind of had inconsistency, quality, and experience over how operations was done. So, like some teams had a high operational burden and would spend a lot of time, reviewing pages and writing runbooks, reviewing alarms, writing documentation, that kind of stuff. And other teams, maybe their operational burden wasn't as high, and so they could get away with kind of more informal approaches to dealing with alarms and on-call. And so this in itself is kind of, having this inconsistency is kind of bad, but it also meant there was a barrier to engineer kind of fluidity in the organization. So we want engineers to be able to, say, switch between teams without a lot of friction. Like, as a reasonably fast-growing startup, we want to be able to move people around depending on business requirements at the time, and having just different ways of doing things in different teams was a barrier, and so we didn't want to build operational moats around teams and our services. We also seemed to tolerate a bit too many out-of-hours pages. So, we had alarms that would go off for things like high CPU over here, or maybe a database failed over there. But there was no need actually to get people out of bed in a lot of these cases. There was either maybe not much customer impact or not any real requirement to do anything about it. So if a database fails over and the failover is successful, like, great. You don't need somebody to actually look at that. You can look at that on Monday morning or whatever. And it doesn't suit everybody to go on call. It wasn't just that we had this high tolerance and we had too many alarms going off. We just wanted less people and less teams on call. So we also had vague expectations that as on-call became more of a thing and our organization continued to grow, that we wanted to just raise the bar and improve the general setup. So we weren't happy with our on-call eating our engineers, and we wanted to do something about it. So it's like a lot of fun building stuff in the scrappy phase of startup life or whatever, but we were starting to build a company which was actually successful and needed sustainability and kind of high-quality engineering work brought in different kind of places. So our on-call setup was kind of odds with our ambitions of building an organization like this. So we decided to fix this thing. So first of all, there's a bunch of things that I say we do here, and it looks kind of easy. It was like months of work. So I don't want to skip over just like how much work was involved in figuring out what to do here, but there's some good things to take away here. So first of all, we assembled a working group of like a mix, mostly of engineering staff, maybe a few engineering leaders, to think about the problem at hand and think about our engineering principles and how we tend to problem solve in Intercom in general. We worked from first principles, like why do we do on-call at all? Who cares? Can we just stop doing it? That unfortunately was not really an option. But one thing we wanted to do was make it opt-in, so that the team would be a virtual team. There would be no single team, say an operations team. We want to continue some amount of kind of DevOps rather than SRE, and have people who could go in to do on-call work and kind of opt into it depending on their personal circumstances, their career circumstances, and whether or not they enjoyed this type of work. So we reckoned it was a good thing to allow people to join this rather than be forced into it due to circumstance of what team they're on. So, at this point, you have to start thinking about how many people we can get involved, how we organize this work day to day, like do we have meetings, Slack channels, all this kind of stuff. But eventually, we kind of organized enough to get like a basic amount of team together to do this. We also proposed new standards around what a good alarm looks like, and new processes about how an alarm gets moved over to the new on-call team. I guess there was this time when we had on-call in the virtual team as well as on-call existing with all of the pre-existing teams. And so we built a process that we could take alarms in and maybe hand them back if they're not good enough. We built out a Terraform pipeline which specifies our alarms both in Datadog and CloudWatch, and that allows us to use the GitHub flow in our alarm setup, which was a good way of getting peer reviews and kind of feedback on this kind of stuff. So we also were able to specify that, say, well, all these alarms need a runbook, or at least somewhere to go where you can use as a starting point, as there was going to be a high chance that somebody, whoever was getting the page for the thing that broke, might have no experience with what they're getting paged for. So some amount of documentation or clues as to where to go looking would be very helpful here. So we moved the alarms over. The progress was initially kind of slow. Some teams were pretty enthusiastic about it. Other teams wanted to fix a bunch of things before moving them over. But what really helped was we had great support from our engineering leadership. They were bought into this approach and strategy. And so we were able to set deadlines for teams and really set engineering goals and organization-wide goals for alarms to get moved over. But one of the things that we didn't do was move alarms over to virtual team during out-of-hours time. So we didn't want to break that connection between team services and the team themselves, as I guess we didn't want to be in that model of where you chuck the code over the wall and the operations team, even if they're virtual, is kind of running them. So most of the time, things actually break when we're deploying code or when our customer traffic is ramping up, which happens to overlap with when we're in the office in Dublin. And so we were solving this problem mostly for Dublin teams, but that meant that the majority of alarms still were staying with the team themselves that owned them, and then just out-of-hours alarms were going to the virtual team, which was nice. So we still had that kind of nice, strong ownership of most of the alarms that fire off. So a few more kind of things about the design or the implementation of the out-of-hours call. So, like I said, the out-of-hours call team get the pages outside of hours. And this started getting a bit interesting when we started bringing in engineers from places that weren't Dublin. But I'll come back to a bit about that later. We do on-call for stuff from around the office, and again, that's when traffic is ramping up and when most deployments happen. So this is when most pages do go off. And one decision we kind of made was like, you can kind of bike shed about this kind of thing, but how long you should be on call for and whether to split the on-call shifts over the week or to pair up over them during the course of the week. We basically decided that it made sense for people to go on a Friday evening and go off shift on the Friday morning. The Friday evening was good because it meant that there was a week of context that could be shared. Say if something was breaking or some stuff was going on, that could be easily handed over to the engineer who's just going on call on the Friday evening. So it just meant that we had the most opportunity to give the most amount of context to the person at the time. Additionally, the number of people is kind of interesting. We wanted people to move in and move out and have this kind of continuous flow of people through the team. So we figured out about kind of 6 or 7, maybe like 8 people on a team, depending if they're onboarding, and for them to move on after about 6 months, which, given that number of people on a team, is probably 3 or 4 shifts or so. So people would come in, do 3 or 4 shifts, participate as part of the team in terms of working with each other on reviewing cases and looking to see how the operations of the team are going, but ultimately move on after a handful of shifts. And so the idea here as well is that we didn't want people getting stuck with doing this role for a long, long time. We want the on-call, the out-of-hours on-call engineer to be a first responder, like stop the bleeding, perform CPR, and resolve what you can with general first aid and knowledge. So to allow this kind of escalation when you don't have the full expertise, we created a simple on-call escalation to an engineering leader. It could be a number of engineering managers or somebody like myself. And so they would have product or business context or organizational knowledge and can help act as an early release valve and de-stress the job of being on call. So, for example, you get a page that a database is down. You do a bunch of the things that is in the runbook or that you know about. At this point, you might start thinking as the on-call engineer, like, who should I bring in? How can I get help? It could be 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And to get rid of those kind of decisions, we said always escalate early to an on-call leader. Just don't make decisions, or don't try to. We want to reduce the stress. We want you to just do the first aid job and not do any kind of specialist work. So this on-call engineer leader was like semi-best effort. It's like there's no real SLA in there. They can escalate to a handful of different on-call leaders if necessary. But the design of it is then the on-call, the engineering leader escalates to the discovers the engineering team manager that's relevant and escalates to them. So we kind of go up the chain and then down the chain, and then the engineering team manager can kind of bring in people depending on exactly what the problem is. We predicted this would be kind of an uncommon thing to do, as a lot of the events will get filtered out, not just by the first level engineer, but the second level escalation. But we designed this thing to try and make sure that we use a path that brings in management to bring in the right people, and they can take the stress away from the engineers from implementing this. And there we are. We can bring in engineers depending on who's available or who knows whichever system is broken or whatever. And so one thing we did do is you are remunerated for each on-call shift, so it's a flat fee. It's not life-changing kind of money, but it's nice to be able to get. And it doesn't matter if you're paged. You just get this flat fee for the course of the week that you're on call. We also expect that people who are on the team will manage their time and rest appropriately. So as a virtual team, you don't really have that many opportunities to see like how people are in the morning. Like you just kind of you might see them on Slack or whatever. And if somebody is troubleshooting for something in the middle of the night, that affects different people in different ways. So we kind of do put a bit of responsibility on the people on the team that they manage themselves, that they're expected to take time off and take half days during times when they're on call and being paged regularly, and their managers will know about this kind of setup. So things didn't all go to plan. The by-the-book escalations, which sounded a bit complex as I was describing it there, ended up being quite uncommon. Turns out when an alarm goes off, it's pretty visible on Slack, and people would just be online and willing to help out. So especially the engineers in SF, they would notice that something had broken and would just help out. They're in the office, why not? And then you had other people who would just check Slack all the time, like myself, and would be just happy to kind of help out. And so we ended up doing a lot more informal escalations just due to people being online by random chance or just willing or interested in getting involved in this stuff. So this by-the-book kind of formal plan didn't really get used too often, though it's still there in the case of more difficult problems. kind of had this fear early on that we would have to hand alarms back to the teams. This was more, I guess, in the time when we had the 2 on-call kind of models in place. But we didn't have to take out the stick as opposed to the carrot of handing off on-call. Teams were all over their paging alarms, and they didn't have any problem. Like, we would open these at the highest possible priority in the morning, and teams would either be tweaking alarms or fixing the problem or just doing a lot of active work to make sure that we don't have recurrence. Or in some cases, we may have just decided that it was okay for a certain page to go off. It was well worth that action being taken. So this was a kind of pleasant surprise. I guess we thought we would have to do a lot more negotiation or prioritization with teams of root causing the problems that cause alarms. Also, there was this slightly weird thing that we noticed that nobody wants to get somebody who they're not working with out of bed. It seems that people were okay getting people that they do work with out of bed. It's like the way that you treat your friends better than your family at times. There's like a social stigma for annoying people that you don't work directly with. So people felt really, really bad getting those people out of bed as opposed to somebody they work with every day, which, I don't know, was kind of surprising. There were some really good things that came out of this on-call setup. So the process I described of us moving alarms through this choke point, being the move into Terraform and through the GitHub flow, we ended up, and the new standards that we brought in of what a good alarm looks like, we ended up destroying the vast majority of alarms, to be honest. Over time, we'd accrued a bunch of alarms on things that maybe don't exist anymore, but in a bunch of cases, we're kind of looking at low-level symptoms as opposed to looking at the customer experience of which is where the best alarms are. So we destroyed a lot of these things by just taking them through this process and taking a look at them and deciding we don't need this. We'd rather just drop this. So that was a nice thing to have. We were worried that we would not be able to rotate people in and out of the team. That we would end up with like 6 people on a team and no one would ever join, and we just end up effectively with a bunch of people who are on call all the time. But this model actually worked. In fact, my main problem with managing this team is trying to manage people coming into the team and setting expectations with them. And people want to rejoin the team, and it's a nice problem to have. We managed to drop the number of pages. So this is an important success metric of the team and keeping this under control. Unlike most months, we have around less than 10 pages a month. Sometimes things can be just busy or noisier. We do examine where the sources of these things and try and take action on every single page. But it's hard to predict when events are going to happen or stop things over time changing. So we definitely want to keep this under control. I think 0 is probably a bit on the lower side, but I think 10 pages a month, you might be getting paged a handful of times during an individual shift, and that seems like a reasonably humane level of interruptions. Additionally, the way we count these things as well is we count events of where you're engaged. So there might actually be more individual pages and pager duty, but these are events that get you out of bed or whatever. So I mentioned the SF team kind of getting interested. So we did design this initially for our Dublin-based teams, which is where the vast majority of our R&D operations at the time were. But we started to build out as we continued to grow teams in San Francisco. And our SF teams just got involved in being aware that alarms are going off when they're in their office and started helping out and just really wanting to go on call for this stuff. So, we accommodated this. We changed around our meeting times. We extended who could get involved, figure out what remuneration we would have, and ultimately ended up changing it to be not just optimized for the Dublin team, but we made it a 24/7 operation so that the teams in SF could also hand over their alarms in the same way that the Dublin teams. And so that meant we had Dublin teams doing out-of-hours on call for SF-based teams during Dublin office hours and vice versa in SF. And so that was nice to make that change so it was consistent experience, as prior to that we had SF engineers doing a lot of their work in the office, and that was kind of more disruptive to their general productivity. And it was also pretty satisfying to apply the same process over to SF teams and bring their alarms over in and get all the kind of benefits that we wanted out of that as well. Also, we recently built a London office, and we've had London engineers get involved. And again, this was kind of natural. We weren't like pushing for London engineers to get involved, but yeah, it was really kind of healthy to see folks get involved and join the team. And one thing that we did which was really positive was we sent out monthly communications. So we just sent out an email of like who's on the team at the moment, any kind of changes, here's the metrics about what stuff's paging, kind of breakdown by team, that kind of stuff, and any other news about what's going on in the exciting world of out-of-hours pages. That was a really good opportunity to get like reinforcement from, say, engineering leadership, where they would follow up with praise and thanks and stuff like that, and make it really like publicly visible that this work was valued. So this wasn't just sharing metrics, it was kind of sharing the support that this work had across the org. Again, so I mentioned that there's support from the org as a whole, but like also the individuals tended to get praise for this in like performance reviews. We have these things called like our comics that we do every single year anniversary. There's a few of them up in our stand outside, and you can see membership of the team like show up in things like that, as well as like on promotion reviews and things like that. So there wasn't just word praise outside of the performance review process. This was also meaningful in terms of people's progression in the organization. And so we kind of accidentally built a global, diverse, engineer-led virtual team. There was no managers in it at the moment. The diverse thing was kind of completely accidental. I guess we had a team that was accessible to all, like very low barriers to entry, good mentoring once you wanted to join it, clear cultural signal about the value of the work. And to be honest, it's a great way to grow and show like leadership, get involved in things, and show like ownership of Intercom and learn about how Intercom works at the lowest possible level. And so people self-selected into this, and we've ultimately ended up with probably the most diverse team in Intercom in terms of lots of factors. So that wasn't an explicit goal of this stuff, but it's pretty satisfying to know that we've built something that can end up like this. So it's not just a club of cranky old systems engineers like myself, which is nice. I was also able to write a job description for our systems engineering team, which was really, really personally satisfying. So my background is systems engineering, and it was nice to be able to decouple the on-call work from a specific role. I think this opens up systems engineering roles to like more diverse candidates. It's a unique selling point when it comes to our team that we have, as opposed to like most systems engineering teams, which tend to have a reasonable amount of kind of shift or out of hours on-call work. So this was personally satisfying that we were able to have like a job family which wasn't dominated by this type of work, which historically it kind of is. So that was pretty satisfying as well. So some takeaways. So I'd say challenge every part of your on-call setup. You know, it's okay for people to do stuff to go on call for stuff that they're not intimately familiar with. If there's good support, of course, this needs to be done with the SLOs, and it's dependent on your exact type of business. But you know, things like this, challenging this stuff of where we don't need to have like in-depth experts on call for absolutely every single system, every single part of the day, unlocked us to be able to build something where on-call become far less of a burden. So be radical, look at who's doing on-call, why, where, when, and kind of work from first principles on this, and try and design stuff that's kind of more humane than more driven by what the computers want us to do. Of course, you need to understand your customers. I think what we have is appropriate for our Intercom in terms of the level of resilience we've got in place and what our service level agreements are with our customers. But you know, we should be putting the people first and not just allowing them to be eaten by the robots. Humans are far superior than computers. A lot of the time you can scale your way out, or do a bunch of engineering work to make things more resilient, or do some front-end work to make failures seem like that they aren't happening. But it's much harder to repair damaged humans or to build new teams to replace teams that have left because the on-call burden was so hard. delete a lot of your alarms. I think it's very easy after individual events to just add an alarm. It can make sense at the time, but a lot of them, especially over time, especially as things change, just aren't relevant. Delete them all, put in a process to review them, put in choke points to kind of stop them just being added easily, and I think you'll see a lot of benefit and a lot of unimportant alarms just go away. And yeah, so this continuous improvement process, just like it's applied elsewhere in different parts of software and technology, continuously improving this stuff just buys time and gets focus and allows you to spend your time building more interesting and better stuff for your customers. And yeah, don't let Oncall eat your engineers. Thank you.